GoForThe2.com in with the Week 12 predictions. Let's jump right into it. Intriguing battle, Navy and Notre Dame. Since 2012, Notre Dame has won 4 of the last 5 over the midshipmen by 17.7 points per game. However, the last 3 games have been decided by 9.3 points per game. And Navy did get this victory in Jacksonville last year by 1 point, 28-27. The midshipmen are coming off a very impressive 43-40 home win over SMU. Backup quarterback did lead that victory. Navy became bowl eligible on Veterans Day. Now go on the road to face an angry Notre Dame team that they've played very well in recent years. Notre Dame's coming off a disappointing blowout road loss to Miami, 41-8. They committed 3 turnovers, which led to early Miami points. Hurricanes were able to jump up 21-0. They never looked back, and they dominated the third-ranked Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now Notre Dame comes back home. It seems like they have not a lot to play for, but I expect Notre Dame to really take out their frustration on the midshipmen in this ballgame. I think this is a bad matchup for Navy from a defensive perspective. Navy enters this ballgame allowing 165 rushing yards per game. They're going up against a big physical, heavy offensive line that really outweighs Navy in this ballgame by about 50 pounds per man. And more importantly, this is a Notre Dame offense that is averaging 303 rushing yards on the ground. Brandon Wimbush is a mobile quarterback that could put pressure on Navy's defense on the perimeter. Deshaun Kaiser was not the same type of quarterback. He was more of a pocket passer, and that's why Navy was able to have success last year in Jacksonville. More importantly, you look at Navy's defense as well. They've entered this ballgame with only 12 total sacks as a defensive unit. If they can't force Notre Dame into third down and long situations and cannot create quarterback pressures on passing downs, I expect Brandon Wimbush to have a huge day, not only on the ground, but through the air on play action. I think the ability for Notre Dame to run between the tackles will open up the play action passing game. I expect Notre Dame to jump up fast and never look back. More importantly as well, you look at Navy's defense, they're allowing opposing offenses to convert 43% of their third down conversions, and more importantly, are -7 in turnover margin. That's a very untypical Navy type of team. Navy traditionally forces turnovers. They're disciplined on the offense and defensive lines, but this is not the same type of team going on their third-string quarterback. They've had a lot of injuries, so that has led to turnovers, and more importantly, the secondary hasn't played well like they have in recent years. I think the speed of Notre Dame can exploit Navy's secondary much the way Temple did in that matchup a couple of weeks ago. Look for Brandon Wimbush to break out. I expect them to start fast and never look back. Look for Notre Dame to take out their frustration in a big way with a big home win, 52-17 over the midshipmen this coming Saturday. Another intriguing battle is a Big 12 matchup. It's Iowa State, it's Baylor. Baylor's won the last 4 meetings by 26.5 points per game. You're looking at an Iowa State team that's coming off a disappointing 49-42 loss to Oklahoma State. They threw an interception in the last 30 seconds to allow Oklahoma State to win that ball game in Ames, 49-42. Iowa State was able to jump up 14-0 on the Cowboys, but the secondary allowed big plays, and that really led to the Oklahoma State winning that ballgame. Couple of factors why you have to be concerned for Iowa State. One, let's look at the quarterback position. Kyle Kemp, the starter or the backup starter, was injured last week. Did not play for much of the game. That he gave way to a redshirt freshman, Zeb Nolan, that played well. He completed 60% of his passes, 263 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. Kyle Kemp might play, he might not play, but if he's healthy enough to play, how much can he stretch Baylor's defense vertically will be the question. The other question as well is if Nolan plays, he's now still an inexperienced quarterback. Baylor will have game film to game plan off the Oklahoma State game. More importantly is Iowa State's rushing attack as well. They put up 105 rushing yards against Oklahoma State's defense last week, and over the last 7 weeks, this is still an Iowa State team that is not running the football consistently. They're only averaging 94.8 rushing yards per game. That could put a lot of pressure on their offensive line and, more importantly, the quarterbacks in this ballgame if they get into third down and long situations and become one-dimensional, or if they fall behind to Baylor on the road. You look at Iowa State's defense entering this ballgame. Very solid in run support, holding opposing offenses to 113 rushing yards on the ground. Secondary's given up 245 passing yards per game, but on the road or on a neutral field site, they're allowing 284 passing yards to opposing offenses. This is still an Iowa State defense that's allowing opposing offenses to convert 43% of the time, and they're going up against a Baylor offense that's playing very well in recent weeks from an offensive perspective. Baylor's averaging 294 passing yards per game. Charlie Brewer is playing very well this year, especially over the last 4 games. This is a Baylor offense that put up 417 passing yards against Texas Tech last week. Over the last 4 games, Baylor's averaging 335 passing yards, 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. I think that's the matchup that you want to see. Baylor's offense going up against the Iowa State secondary Saturday in Waco. More importantly as well, is Baylor's playing well in run support over the last 4 weeks. They are only allowing 126.5 rushing yards to opposing offenses. If they could force Iowa State into third down and long situations, play good against the run, that could put pressure on either Kyle Kemp or Zeb Nolan. And I think Baylor gets the victory here. They're creating sacks over the last 4 weeks. They have 8 total sacks over the last 4 ball games. I think they could put some pressure on the quarterbacks of Iowa State and score first. I'm calling for the 37-34 Baylor victory over Iowa State in Waco. Where is Iowa State as well after coming off back-to-back emotional losses? 2 weeks ago, they lost a 20-16 matchup to Will Grier in West Virginia. Last week, they got intercepted with less than 30 seconds left after jumping up 14-0 on Oklahoma State. Now they go on the road to face a team that's 1-9. I don't like that matchup. Baylor bounces back and gets their second win of the year. They're still fighting hard for Matt Rhule and get a gutty 3-point win over Iowa State this coming weekend in Waco. Let's stay in the Big 12. It's Oklahoma State. It's Kansas State. Kansas State coming off a disappointing 28-23 home loss to West Virginia and Will Grier. I was on the Mountaineers. They didn't disappoint. Will Grier put up 372 passing yards on K-State, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. You look from the series, Oklahoma State picked up this victory last year by 6 points. They scored with less than 30 seconds left on the clock to give Mason Rudolph and the crew the victory in Manhattan. They battled that game out and got the victory within the last minute. They've won 3 of the last 5 over Kansas State by 4 points per game, but I really feel this is a bad matchup for the Wildcats. From an offensive perspective, Kansas State, they're averaging 192 rushing yards on the ground. They're passing for 182 yards through the air. Alex Delton might play, he might not play. It doesn't matter. This is still a defense that's allowing 303 passing yards to opposing offenses. That's Kansas State's highest passing defensive total since prior to the 2008 season. More importantly, over the last four weeks, Kansas State has allowed 401 passing yards per game. They've allowed 11 touchdowns and have only committed or forced 5 interceptions during that span. They're going up against an Oklahoma State offense that's still prolific. Oklahoma State's averaging 194 rushing yards on the ground. They have Justice Hill. They have King. They could also catch the football out of the backfield. You're looking at an Oklahoma State offense that's still averaging 378 passing yards per game. Mason Rudolph has completed 64% of his passes, 3,690 yards, 30 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. I think they jump up early, put the pressure on Kansas State to match them score for score, and Oklahoma State's due to break out, and I think this is the one. Kansas State's fighting to become bowl eligible. They're 5-5, but I don't think it matters. I said it last week. Kansas State has defeated an FCS opponent. They defeated Charlotte, who has 1 win. They defeated Baylor, who has 1 win. Kansas, who has 1 win, and a Texas Tech team that's sitting at 5-5. I think Oklahoma State is the superior team, and they dominate this matchup by 31 points. Oklahoma State 48, Kansas State 17 in Stillwater. Another intriguing battle is a Big Ten matchup. It's Purdue on the road against Iowa. Purdue coming off a 10-point loss to Northwestern, a Northwestern team that happens to be streaking. They've won 4 straight games, playing very well on the defensive side of the ball, and Purdue was in that game and played very well from a defensive standpoint. You look at Iowa, they're coming off a very disappointing road loss to Wisconsin. They were in that ball game early and allowed Wisconsin to dominate in the second half. They now come back home to a team that they've dominated in recent years. Over the last 4 games, Iowa's 4-0 over Purdue and has won those games by 18 points per game. They won this ball game in West Lafayette last year by 14 points, but that game was a lot closer than people thought because Iowa jumped out to a huge first-half lead before David Blau made it close with some key touchdown passes in the second half. But you look at Purdue from a defensive perspective, really playing well in run support. They're holding opposing offenses to 139 rushing yards on the ground. And more importantly, over the last 3 games against Illinois, Nebraska, and Northwestern, they've only allowed 71.8 rushing yards per game and only 1 rushing touchdown. This is still an Iowa team that's only averaging 131 rushing yards per game. You look at Iowa from a defensive perspective as well. Defensively, they're allowing 157 rushing yards per game, and even though they're forcing turnovers with Josh Jackson in the secondary, they're still giving up around 200 passing yards to opposing offenses. More importantly, you look at the third down offense for Iowa entering this ballgame, they're right in the area of about 36%. If Purdue could force Iowa into third down and long situations, I think they're going to be in this ball game from start to finish. Purdue is 4-6. They're still fighting to become bowl eligible. You might get a letdown here from Iowa. They come back home to a team they've dominated in recent years, but Purdue matches up very well this year with their new head coach, Jeff Brom, and they're better on the defensive front 7. I think that's the matchup you want to see play out. Sindelar, he's still playing well enough to stretch Iowa's defense vertically. I think Purdue is in this ballgame from start to finish. In the end, Purdue loses a very close ballgame, 30-27. Iowa picks up a 3-point win over the Boilermakers this coming weekend. Another intriguing battle. It's an ACC battle. It's Virginia. It's Miami. I was all over the Hurricanes last week. They didn't disappoint. They forced 3 turnovers against Notre Dame. Offense looked fantastic by Malik Rozier. This is a team that is expected when tomorrow's rankings to come out, possibly 1, possibly 2 at the very least in the college football playoff rankings, and rightfully so. This is a team that's coming off dominant back-to-back efforts over Virginia Tech and Notre Dame. But this is a team in Virginia that's played Miami very well in recent years. Now, from a series perspective, Miami's won 3 of the last 5 and have won those games by 15 points per game. Miami did get this victory last year in Charlottesville, 34-14. But this is a different group in Virginia this year. They're 6-4 overall. They're already bowl eligible, but have a very good secondary heading into this ball game with a solid blue-collar coach in Bronco Mendenhall. Virginia's coming off a disappointing road loss to an athletic Louisville team. They lost that matchup by 17 points. I picked Louisville last week. They didn't disappoint. Thought it was a bad matchup from a defensive perspective with a mobile quarterback in Lamar Jackson. Now it's back-to-back road games for Virginia. They go against a very hot Miami offense and defense. But I think Virginia's defense will keep them in this ballgame. This is a Virginia defense that's holding opposing offenses to only 180 passing yards per game. Over the last 3 weeks, Virginia's only allowed 169.1 passing yards to opposing offenses. They have 24 total sacks on the year. They forced turnovers. They enter this ballgame at +3 in turnover margin and are holding opposing offenses to 33% on third down conversions. You look at Miami's offense entering this ballgame, as great as they've been in terms of offense and offensive balance, they're passing for 270 passing yards per game and rushing for right in the area of about 183 yards per game. Miami's only converting 29% of their third down conversions. They're going up against a veteran secondary. If Virginia could put them into third down and long situations, they can force 3 and outs and give the football back to their offense. And this is an offense now in Virginia that has a solid senior quarterback in Kurt Benkert that's completing 59% of his passes, over 2,400 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. I think this is a difficult ball game from Miami from a defensive perspective. It's an ACC conference game. Miami has a lot of pressure on them. I think they win, but it is a lot closer than people think. Look for Miami to win this ball game. High scoring, 37-30. Miami gets a 7-point victory over Virginia. I think Virginia's in this game from start to finish, pushes Miami to the limit, but the Hurricanes prevail 37-30 in South Beach off their emotional, dominating win over Notre Dame. Another intriguing battle is a Big 12 battle. It is Texas. It is West Virginia. Intriguing battle that West Virginia's won 2 straight over Texas by 11 points per game. You look at Texas, they're coming off a double-digit win over Kansas. Could not blow out the Jayhawks. The Jayhawks were in that ballgame from start to finish. From a Vegas angle, Kansas made a lot of people happy in that ballgame. This is a Texas defense, though, that goes on the road to Morgantown to face a prolific offense in West Virginia and Will Grier. Will Grier is putting up dynamic numbers this year. He's thrown 31 touchdown passes and will look to exploit a Texas defense that's given up 252 passing yards to opposing offenses. But I look at this game, I think it comes down to a couple of factors. Texas is fighting to become bowl eligible. They're sitting at 5-5, and West Virginia does have top-ranked Oklahoma on deck next weekend in Norman. I know it's Texas, but are they looking ahead to the Sooners next coming weekend? You look at Texas from a defensive perspective, holding opposing offenses to 115 rushing yards on the ground, and more importantly, from a third down defense, holding opposing offenses to 29% on third down conversions. They entered this ballgame forcing turnovers, +5 in turnover margin, and even as good as Will Grier has been this year, he's still committing turnovers. He threw 2 interceptions last week against Kansas State. You look at Shane Buechele, he did play solid last week. He did throw 1 touchdown, no interceptions. He threw for right around 240 yards in that ballgame against Kansas. Now goes on the road. Look for Texas to be in this ballgame from start to finish. I think they get the victory. They play traditionally West Virginia very good. These are close ball games. I'm calling for the 35-31 Texas victory in Morgantown this coming weekend. Tom Herman, I think, does have the coaching advantage over Dana Holgorsen. Still not sold on the consistency of Holgorsen as a coach. Some of his play calls sometimes are very unreliable. Doesn't really game plan, especially in the second half. I like the underdog. I like Tom Herman. They picked a victory 35-31 over West Virginia this coming weekend. It's Big 12 heavy. We're another Big 12 game. Last game of the board is TCU. It is Texas Tech. When you look at this ball game, Texas Tech picked up this victory in Fort Worth last year, 27-24. This is a TCU offense that struggled again. Only 1 touchdown pass against Oklahoma. They got blown out in that ball game, 38-24. You look at this ball game by TCU. Couple of factors. Kenny Hill, he's completing 65% of his passes, only 16 touchdowns, 5 interceptions over the last 3 weeks now. This is a TCU offense that has only thrown 1 touchdown pass. More importantly, TCU from an offensive perspective, 48% on third down conversions. Middle of the year, TCU was averaging 53% on third downs. Over the last 3 games now, they've only converted 29% of their third downs. But I think they get healthy this coming weekend. They're going up against a Texas Tech Red Raider defense over the last 4 weeks that has allowed 29 of 54 third down conversions. That's 54%. And this is a Texas Tech defense that's giving up 300 passing yards per game. You're looking at a TCU defense that's still allowing 87 rushing yards per game and they're only giving up 224 passing yards to opposing offenses. They're the more complete team with the better head coach. I know they're going on the road to Lubbock. Texas Tech is looking to become bowl eligible, but I don't think it matters. I think TCU bounces back, gets a convincing road win over the Red Raiders. I think it's big too. 44-21, TCU dominates this matchup on the road in Lubbock. Follow the radio show every Saturday, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific. College Football Today, channel 262 on Dish Network, or go to Fantasy Sports Television or Radio Network, New York, New Jersey, Cable Optimum Networks, or go to fntsy.com/radio. College football is the best. I just love talking about it. See you next weekend. Have a great weekend, everyone.